She wrote a children's book about losing a parent. She promoted it on morning television. She sat across from a news anchor and talked about grief with calm, measured sincerity, about how she wanted to help her 3 young sons understand what had happened to their father. The segment aired in April 2023. 1 month later, she was arrested for his murder, and the detail that investigators had been sitting on since the very beginning, the detail that cracked this entire case wide open, was something so ordinary, so domestic, that it almost didn't register as evidence at all. But before we get to that, you need to understand who Eric Richins was. Because this story only makes sense when you understand what he had already figured out, quietly, without telling anyone, more than a year before he died. Eric Eugene Richins was 39 years old, living in Francis, Utah, a quiet mountain community east of Park City. He and Kouri had been married for 9 years. They had 3 young boys. Eric ran a construction and development business. Kouri worked as a real estate agent and operated several investment properties. From the outside, they appeared to be a successful family, a large home in the mountains, a growing portfolio, the kind of life that looks stable from every direction. But in October 2020, Eric Richins walked into the offices of both a divorce lawyer and an estate planning lawyer. He did not tell Kouri. He did not tell friends. He changed his will, established a living trust, transferred his business interests into that trust, and designated his sister Katie as trustee for the primary benefit of his 3 children. He also changed the beneficiary of his $500,000 life insurance policy, away from Kouri, to the trust. Eric Richins was quietly building a legal wall between his money and his wife. He did all of it in silence, and investigators would later ask the same question every person following this case eventually asks. What did Eric know in October 2020 that made him that afraid? Because what came next suggests he was right to be afraid. On January 1st, 2022, 14 months after Eric made those changes, Kouri accessed his $2 million life insurance policy and changed the listed beneficiary to herself, without his knowledge, without his authorization. On New Year's Day, the insurance company flagged the unauthorized change immediately. Eric's business partner was restored as the beneficiary. The attempt failed, but the record of it did not disappear. Kouri Richins had tried, in secret, to redirect $2 million in life insurance benefits to herself. And here is what investigators established about her financial situation at that exact moment. She was more than $2 million in debt. Her real estate business carried serious obligations she had not disclosed publicly. She owed Eric personally a loan from September 2020, the full amount still outstanding. She was by every financial measure running out of options, and she was simultaneously involved in a secret romantic relationship with another man that had been going on for nearly 2 years. That combination, the debt, the secret relationship, the failed insurance attempt, would become the foundation of everything prosecutors argued in court. But the piece of evidence that made the jury go completely silent is still coming. And it involves a text message, a name, and a reference to Michael Jackson. His name was Josh Grossman. He and Kouri had been seeing each other since early 2020. Kouri had given him money, purchased vehicles for him, and allowed him to stay in properties she managed. The text messages between them, recovered during the investigation, show that by early 2022, Kouri was already thinking about a future that did not include Eric. On February 15, 2022, she texted Grossman. If she was divorced right now and asked him to marry her tomorrow, would he? He replied that he was in love with her. Of course he would. That message was sent the day after Valentine's Day. And what happened on Valentine's Day itself is the moment this case stops being about a struggling marriage and becomes something that is genuinely difficult to sit with. But first, you need to know what Kouri had done 3 days before that. On February 11th or 12th of 2022, Kouri Richins contacted a woman she knew named Carmen Lauber. The text messages between them are part of the public trial record. In those messages, Kouri asked Lauber for what she described as the Michael Jackson drug. The reference was to propofol, the anesthetic agent that contributed to Michael Jackson's death in 2009. Lauber did not have propofol, but she had access to a dealer. Within days, she obtained up to 30 illicit fentanyl pills and passed them to Kouri. Cell phone tower data introduced at trial placed both Lauber's phone and the dealer's phone near the same gas station on the exact dates those transactions occurred. Kouri Richins now had enough fentanyl to kill multiple people. And what she did with it next, on Valentine's Day, 3 days later, is the detail that Eric himself described to a friend in real time. He just didn't know yet that he would only survive it once. February 14th, 2022. Valentine's Day. Eric Richins ate a sandwich that Kouri had prepared for him. Within hours, he became seriously ill. According to testimony at trial, Eric told at least one friend, directly and without ambiguity, that he believed his wife was trying to poison him. He did not call the police. He did not go to a hospital. He recovered over the following hours and went back to his normal life. No report was ever filed. And the morning after Valentine's Day, while Eric was recovering in their home, Kouri sent that message to Grossman about marriage. Prosecutors later charged the Valentine's Day incident as an attempted murder. The jury agreed. Eric Richins had survived the first attempt and had no idea there would be a second. He went back to sleeping in the same house, in the same bed, as the woman who had just tried to kill him. He trusted that what had happened was either coincidence or something he had misread. He was wrong on both counts. On February 26th, 12 days after Valentine's Day, Kouri contacted Lauber again. She asked for more pills. Lauber obtained an additional supply through the same dealer. The cell phone data again placed the relevant phones near the same gas station. Kouri now had a second supply. And investigators, when they eventually mapped this entire timeline, noted the precision of it. The gap between the first purchase, the failed Valentine's Day attempt, and the second purchase was not random. It followed a specific logic. The first attempt had not worked the way it was supposed to. The second was not going to leave anything to chance. What happened on the night of March 3rd, 2022, inside that house in Francis, Utah, was visible to no one on the outside. And that is exactly how it had been designed. Kouri prepared drinks that night. Moscow mules, vodka, ginger beer served in the bedroom. According to her account to investigators, Eric also ate a marijuana gummy. She said they sat together on the bed, drank, and then she went to check on one of their sons who was having bad dreams. She said she fell asleep in the child's room and did not return to the master bedroom until the early morning hours. She said she found Eric unresponsive at the foot of the bed. She called 911 at 3:22 a.m. First responders arrived and pronounced Eric dead at the scene. The responding officers noted in their reports, and the body cam footage from that night documents, that Eric appeared to have been deceased for considerably longer than the timeline Kouri had described. That observation, recorded in the first hours of the investigation, became one of the threads detectives would never let go of. Because the autopsy did not find what Kouri had told people in the immediate days after his death. She had said he suffered a brain aneurysm. The medical examiner found something completely different. Eric Richins had died from fentanyl intoxication. Illicit fentanyl, street grade, at a concentration of approximately 5 times the amount required to kill an adult male. That number, 5 times the lethal dose, is not an accident. That number is not a miscalculation. It is a quantity that, according to the prosecution's expert witnesses, was specifically designed to ensure death and to do so quickly, before anyone could intervene. Investigators now had a toxicology report that established cause of death and identified the substance. What they needed was the chain connecting that substance to Kouri. And here is where this investigation reveals something about how these cases actually get solved. Not through a single dramatic discovery, but through the slow, methodical assembly of a sequence that eventually becomes impossible to explain in any innocent way. Because Kouri had not asked just one person for drugs in the weeks before Eric died. She had asked 2. The second was a handyman named William Hayden Jeffs who worked on properties she managed. He came forward voluntarily. He showed investigators text messages in which Kouri had explicitly asked him to supply her with fentanyl and propofol. Two separate people, in two separate conversations, in the same narrow window of time before March 4th. And then, 5 days after Eric's death, Kouri texted Carmen Lauber. The message read, "Still have your hookup?" Investigators never determined what she intended to do with more fentanyl, but that message existed. It had a timestamp, and it was now in the evidence file alongside everything else. The investigation continued quietly for more than a year. Kouri Richins did not appear to be hiding. She continued to work in real estate. She continued her relationship with Josh Grossman for several months before it ended. She grieved, publicly and visibly, in the way that people grieve when they have lost a spouse unexpectedly. And she wrote the book, Are You With Me? A short, illustrated children's book about a child losing a parent, written and self-published by Kouri Richins. She described the process in interviews as part of her healing. She said she had searched for a story like this to read to her sons and hadn't been able to find one. She said she wrote it for them. She promoted it in April 2023 on a morning television segment on a Salt Lake City affiliate, sitting across from a host and speaking about the grief of losing a husband without warning, about what it means to try to help young children understand death when there are no easy answers. She was composed, articulate, and visibly emotional at the right moments. The segment aired on April 25, 2023. On May 8, 2023, she was arrested and charged with aggravated murder. The charges included first-degree aggravated murder for Eric's death, attempted aggravated murder for the Valentine's Day incident, insurance fraud for the unauthorized beneficiary change on January 1st, and forgery. In a separate case, she also faced more than 24 counts of mortgage fraud, alleging she had submitted falsified bank statements in support of loan applications for her real estate business and had engaged in money laundering. The financial picture prosecutors painted at trial was not of a woman who had made a few bad decisions under pressure. It was of someone who had been operating for years at the edge of collapse, borrowing, falsifying, maneuvering, while projecting publicly the image of a successful businesswoman and devoted mother. Someone who had looked at that collapsing financial picture, at a husband who had quietly restructured his estate to protect his assets from her, at a $2 million life insurance policy she could not access, and had calculated that the only viable exit from the situation she was in was his death. The trial began in February 2026. It ran for more than 3 weeks. Nearly 40 witnesses testified. Jurors heard from Carmen Lauber. They heard from the fentanyl dealer, testifying from jail about the gas station transactions. They heard from Josh Grossman, who sat in the witness stand while pages of text messages between himself and Kouri were displayed for the courtroom. Messages about love, about a future together, about marriage. He shifted in his seat throughout his testimony. He held back tears at multiple points. He testified that approximately 2 weeks after Eric's death, Kouri had asked him a question he did not understand at the time: whether he had ever killed anyone. He said he hadn't known what to make of it. He said things between them were never the same after Eric died. The relationship ended within months, and then the jury heard testimony about what Eric's final weeks had actually looked like, from his family, from friends, from people who had watched the marriage deteriorate and had not known what to do with what they were seeing. The prosecution built their case the way investigators had built their file, one piece at a time, in sequence, until the sequence itself became the argument. The jury deliberated for 1 day. They returned a unanimous verdict on all counts: guilty of aggravated murder, guilty of attempted aggravated murder, guilty of insurance fraud, guilty of forgery. The defense had argued throughout the trial that every piece of evidence was circumstantial, that no one had witnessed Kouri putting anything in Eric's drink, that the financial difficulties she faced were real but not unusual, and that the prosecution had constructed a narrative around facts that had other explanations. The jury considered all of it. They needed 1 day to decide it was not enough. Sentencing was held on May 13, 2026. The date was not accidental. It was what would have been Eric Richins' 44th birthday. Kouri stood in the courtroom and addressed her sons directly. She told them she loved them. She said she would fight the charges for as long as it took. Eric's sons also spoke. They said they would feel unsafe if their mother were ever released. Judge Richard Mrazek sentenced Kouri Richins to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He stated plainly that she had been convicted unanimously and beyond a reasonable doubt of attempting to murder her husband and then succeeding, the father of her 3 children. She was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. She has indicated she will appeal. The book Are You With Me is no longer in print. The grief it claimed to address was real. The 3 boys who lost their father are real. Eric Richins had spent more than a year quietly building a legal structure to protect his children from whatever he feared his wife might do. He changed his will. He restructured his estate. He moved his assets out of her reach. He did everything a person can do legally to protect their family from a threat they cannot name to anyone. And the one thing he did not do, the one thing that might have changed everything, was call the police on Valentine's Day, when he told his friend he believed she was trying to kill him. He survived that day. He trusted that he had misread the situation. He went back to the house. He went back to the bed. And 17 days later, he did not wake up. Somewhere in the space between those 2 nights, between the attempt that failed and the one that didn't, is the part of this case that no verdict, no sentence, no amount of courtroom testimony will ever be able to fully close.